We're happy to be presenting in person for the first time in 3 years, and also offer the virtual component as well. But thanks again to everyone for joining us today. Today we'll be running through active grant management for your local park grant. I'll be joined by the remainder of the local parks team. Blake Powers is here with us, and we've got several folks from our fiscal team here today as well. And so I'd like to encourage everyone to ask questions throughout the presentation today. And so if you're here in person, please feel free to raise your hand and ask a question at any point in time. For you folks that are joined in virtually, you'll see the little questions tab on your taskbar on the right there in the GoToWebinar portal. So please feel free to type your questions in there, and we'll do our best to answer those as we make our way through the presentation. There we go. All right, so this is what we have in store for everyone today. First, we'll go through our introductions. We'll introduce our team. We'll give everyone here an opportunity to introduce themselves as well. We'd like to hear from you. Blake will jump in when we get through that and kind of run through Rec Grants Online, or ARGO. You guys have already made it through the application process at this point, so you're probably pretty familiar with ARGO. But you'll continue to use that same login, that same portal for managing your active grant throughout the life of the project. When Blake's done, our fiscal folks will jump in and they'll talk through all of your fiscal related project management tasks. We'll take a break after that, let everybody stretch their legs for a little bit. And then the local park team will all come up and we'll talk through all your project management tasks on the programmatic side. We'll have time for questions and answers at the end. I think we'll finish probably well ahead of schedule. But again, I want to encourage everyone to ask questions throughout the presentation today. So just a few of our introductions. Many of you probably know Dana, who's our director. She's been with Rec Grants for a while now, previously served in the co-op program as well as our local park program. She's been our director now for 4 or 5 years. That's me on the right, Dan Reese. Again, I manage the local park grant program here. Blake Powers is joining us as well. Blake is our business systems administrator. And Blake, you can tell everyone more about yourself if you like. We can get up.
Sure. Most of you probably have dealt with me before during the application process. I'm systems admin for Rec Grants. My role at Rec Grants started 5.5 years ago. And I helped improve, develop a process flow, which really is just a series of statuses where grants go. Either you have the action or we have the action. And most of the time, that winds up being in the past. At this point, we've got a grant. Everything's usually on your home screen, your task list. Now, what I'll show you is a little bit of change to get that project that needs to do. There's no just default task there. That's part of what we designed in the system. I've been here, like I said, almost 6 years. And role is primarily technical support, not programmatic advisor, so to speak. Combining their other resources and do
Thanks, Blake. Amy Grossman is our compliance coordinator. So unfortunately, Amy's a little under the weather today, so she's not joining us. Amy's role in our team is a little different than everyone else. She doesn't actually manage active grants, so you may not have a lot of involvement with her. But she's in charge of long-term compliance for all of our funded parks throughout the state. So you'll certainly have an opportunity to work with her moving forward. And we'll get into a little more detail about compliance and long-term a little later in today's presentation. And then here's the rest of our team. Megan Nelson is one of our grant coordinators. And since you guys are all coming up, I'll let y'all talk about yourselves when you come up. Megan's been with us about a year now. Matt Mears, unfortunately, also under the weather today, so we've pivoted a little bit with our presentation, but we've got you covered. Lindsay Sansom is here with us today, in addition to Crystal Locke. And so that comprises the local parks team. You'll get an opportunity to hear from everyone that is not feeling poorly later today. And so what I'd like to do now is give everyone that's here an opportunity to introduce themselves, including our fiscal folks if they'd like to. But let us know, who you are, where you're from. Give us a little bit of information about your park. We'd like to hear more about your project. And then let us know if this is your first grant or if you have other experience with any of our local park grants. But, Marcy, you want to?
Hi, I'm Marcy Kaminga. I don't have a card.
Again, I'm Brian Walker. I'm the fiscal manager here at Central Office of Grants. And I'm glad to be with you. We'll be saying that, speaking with you a little bit about the fiscal stuff and what we're looking at. A couple of minutes.
My name is Myra Thompson with the city of Moline. I do have a park that we've been working on and have been very generous and gave us a grant. I kind of inherited the position and absorbed the position and the duties, small town and tax. So I take on 4 different positions at the city. The only previous experience I have with the park grant was through St. David's as well. When we renovated completely 100%. Really grant forward.
Yeah.
We renovated 1 park. We have 3 parks, big parks, and we are almost done. So I'm basically at the step where almost complete and ready to get some forward.
Awesome.
That's what.
How's the pool doing in Luling?
The pool, great. We're gonna do something about the.
Yeah.
But the other parts, 3 large basketball courts. It's beautiful.
The pool, I think, was funded through our program like back in the 1970s. So still hanging in there.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us. Oops, sorry. Go ahead, Carl.
Now this year we get to start on our next smaller parcel, and that's using some stable elements to working on together. So
And what's left is the lot. I was trimming trees on the weekend and had a power separation with my ladder. So this one isn't working. I've been with parks, doing parks and rec now for 39 years. I believe included 33 parks. With direct parks and wildlife. I'm very fortunate to be working with the community as a buddy. Right here. I'm Bill Patterson, I'm project manager with McMullen County, very small rural county, south of San Antonio, Pleasant, and all that. And this will be our first park. There are no cities in our county, so this is our first county park. It'll be about 4.5 acres. We've been awarded the money. We've had some changes to COVID, so cut back on how fast we're going to go into it. We just want to be sure that it's accepted and kept up and all that before we go home too long. But we're looking forward to getting going on this.
Well, thanks for coming up. That's a little bit of a drive for you.
Carlos, Corina Vargas, I'm brother from Sultan. helping the cities and Broward County. We're working with, one with South Texas and one with, we have been working on this program for a long time. Probably longer.
Now, the clean food is slower than water.
We have enjoyed, the program and the team, but, you provide things very much. We appreciate it.
Thanks for coming, Carlos.
I'm Joelle Guzman, I'm the grant and federal coverage program for the city of Belton. We're a small city and I was filming after the last fire on the first grant that we received and we're working on now. So we very hard and we received letters that we got awarded another grant for our Sand Park, historical park that we're developing and from there, and, you know, part of experiencing, it doesn't have a lot, me myself, not so much. So, I'm a work in progress.
You'll get there pretty quick.
I am running out south of the Buffalo program coordinator. Our parks department is working with more like, our department helps deliver the construction of these projects, and so I'm going to make sure that we're letting them know what they need before.
Great, thanks for coming.
I'm Maggie Stund, I'm in City of Austin Parks Department. I've been a coordinator for about 3.5 years, so when I started, we probably had 7 active programs. Now we have one and one that's and one on the way. So anyway, and I don't know how many grants we've had in the past. You guys could probably
Dozens, probably, yeah.
So anyway, and then we're also with City of Austin, and he's sort of taking over. So
For my group, working with the city of Austin, Parks and Rec, revenue. My first grant, it's been very much helpful, getting that.
Yeah, Maggie, you could probably give this presentation by now.
My name is Daryl, and I work here at Park and Wildlife under Brian and Marcy, and a lot of the stuff that you submitted will come through my desk. So if you have any questions or concerns, whatever, the phone's always open. And been here going on a year.
My name is Michael Sanford. I'm also part of this team here at Park and Wildlife in Grants Division. Only been here just under 2 months. So I'm learning a lot of the new people in the room. I just sit back row, so I'm taking notes, learning the program with you. Great to see all the small town people here. I grew up in small town Texas, small town Idaho, so I know these great communities, those rural places throughout the state. And big guys, good to see all things. I see everybody.
My name is Michael Garza. I'm one of the first auditors here at the city. And what I'd like to have a talk to you, to do at some point. That's something I used to. And yeah, happy to serve y'all and any other questions you may have if you're interested.
Hi, I'm Nathan. I am one of the parks grant coordinators for the complete outreach season. I've been here for the same amount of time as Daryl. Before that, I was at the university. I'm still learning as I go, but I feel like I finally starting to learn.
Hi, I'm Megan Wilson. I'm an estimator in the agency for almost 10 years now. And this position for and I'm Crystal Locke. I am about 8 months new to Texas Parks and Wildlife. I'm excited that you're here and
All right, and so we don't leave anybody out that's online, I'll just give a quick shout out to folks from Winsboro, Flower Mound, The Colony, Terrell, El Paso, Brenham, Farmers Branch, Brazoria County, Eagle Pass, Austin, Fort Worth, Mont Bellevue, El Paso, Travis County, Charlotte, Alpine, Fort Worth again, Houston, El Paso again, and City of Marion. So thanks for you that are joining online. Thanks for you that are here in person. Again, we haven't done one of these in person in a while, so it feels good to see faces when presenting. Just make it go a little better for me. But again, ask questions throughout the presentation today. We'd like to keep this as interactive as possible. All right, Blake, I think I'll let you come up if you'd like and talk a little bit about Argo.
Everybody, I run through the slides real quick and then we'll do just a quick demonstration. Basically, there's just a few things, big tent poles, that if you can just know where these resources are from a technical perspective, very easy to manage your grant in the system. There's really only 4 things you're going to do. So I'll show you where those resources are, and we'll go through the slides first. This is not a Argo workshop. The resources available are extensive. The videos are extensive. The PDFs are extensive. There are screenshots step by step. The biggest thing I can tell you is you'll do yourself a big favor if you just read. Just sit down and read the resources. They're very thorough. It's like I'm sitting there with you, and you know, I try to be and anticipate the things that you run into when you're using the system. So Rec Grants Online, the easiest way to find it is to go to our Rec Grants website, if you know where that is, and to click the Apply Manage link. It will link you over to Argo 2020, as it's called now. It's called Argo 2020 because there was an older version of Argo. And at the time we rolled out the new system, we were not able to untrack all the projects that were closing out in the old system. So the old system was Argo, this one was Argo 2020. At some point here soon, we'll rebrand it. It's really just Argo now. There is no alternate version anywhere. So that's something we'll go over. The main thing, we'll cover some of the tent poles of your grant, but one of the main forms that you're going to need to learn to use is the project elements form. Okay, what that form essentially is a document portal for your project. All right, there are certain things in the system that are common to every project, and then there are benchmarks that are common to your project only. Right, project elements is typically where that happens. Items that are added there that you'll have to supply, direct deposit form, AP 15210s. Most of you in preparation for your grant agreement are going to get those provided through the project elements form. Again, I'll point you at where the resource is. There's an entire guide to using the project elements form. It's step by step. The icons make it very easy to determine if the item you provided is approved, if it's not yet added, or if it's waiting to be reviewed. Really clear, simple icons. The big thing to note about that form is things that will get added to that would be a task for your construction plans and specs, any kind of appraisal, right? Things that would be common to different projects. Not everybody would have an appraisal. Let's say there's no land acquisition that's part of your project. The project elements form for your project might not have that, right? Your grant coordinator will know that. Another thing that comes up quite often, sometimes people will email and say, I'm ready to upload these plans and specs. If the task isn't added in the system, there's nowhere for you to put it, okay? So at that point, you're gonna wanna reach out to your grant coordinator and find out, hey, can you add this? Because we're ready to provide it, right? So the project elements form, simple document portal, upload, we approve or ask for changes. That's the nature of that form, okay? The agreement signatures form. This is a form that you're going to use when you sign your grant agreement, okay? It's covered in the system resources of how to sign your grant agreement. The main thing to note about the agreement signatures form is this: it automatically generates the main section of your grant agreement using the link to PDF button, okay? That's one part of it, but that's not all you have to sign, okay? That is just the reason that that is linked through the PDF is that's language that doesn't change, and that's the language provided by the Texas Parks and Wildlife Legal Department for our grant agreement with you, okay? So that's just a canned link. When you click that, you're gonna have to sign that form. Usually on that form in the last section before the signatures area, there's a section that says attachments. The following attachments are made party to this agreement by reference, right? Further down in the agreement signatures form, there's a whole bunch of attachments. You're gonna have to sign some of them and include them with your grant agreement when you upload it, okay? There's a lobbying form, certification of lobbying form. I believe some projects have to have a boundary map signed, right? Whatever is stipulated for your project, you're gonna have to sign and provide those with the main grant agreement. So what'll happen is, and this is all covered on the how to sign your grant agreement page, you'll go to this page, once your grant agreement's ready, you'll generate the main grant agreement, and then you'll look for the attachments and at least download and sign the ones that require signature. Compile those into one file, upload here. The main thing people forget to do is status change. If you don't status change something in the system, it's not in our action queue. It still shows up in your task list. It hasn't been status changed to us yet, okay? So just remember, as you have a benchmark task in this system, except for the project elements form, which you just upload things, but if you have to sign an agreement, you have to status change it to us to review, right? If you go into the amendment workflow later, you're gonna have to status change your amendment request, right? When you create a reimbursement request, you have to status change it for us to look at it. When you have a quarterly report, you can't submit it without status changing, okay? So getting familiar with the status change features in the system, which is real simple. You hover over status changes, there's usually one button and you click it, okay? It's not extremely complicated. In all of the individual tasks that we're going to talk about, they have in the guides that show you how to action those tasks, it shows you what the status change button looks like that you need to click, okay? So your agreement signatures form allows you to download the primary section of the grant agreement. The attachment link offers the downloads. Download the primary agreement, all of the required attachments you need to sign, and then upload, save, status change, okay? That's the 30,000 foot view of that. So up to the point where you sign your grant agreement, it's not active, right? It's not active until it gets reviewed by our team and processed by the TPWD finance department, all right? What has to happen is they have to create a purchase order for your grant because you're essentially the same as a vendor in the state of Texas, according to the comptroller, all right? So it takes a minute, all right? That's not instant. So if you return your grant agreement and it takes a bit, that's because we're at the mercy of TPWD Finance approving the purchase order for your grant. Once they do that, we'll move it to active and you'll get an email saying your project's active and you can resume all the project activities. If you haven't gotten that email yet, it's not active, okay? Quarterly reports. These are one of the easiest features in the system, and one of the nice features about this system is you can look at your quarterly reports granularly. In the old system, there was only one, and you had to keep uploading and overriding it so you could never find it. In this one, it's labeled Q1 year, Q2 year, Q3 year. So if you have a 5-year project, you'll see all 20 of them at the end in your related documents menu. That's all covered in the instructions. What happens is on the first of every month, the system automatically generates a quarterly report for you, and you'll get an email saying your quarterly report's ready, log in and submit it, right? There's a link to typically the instructions of how to complete a quarterly report, but that's one of the easier ones because it appears in your task list. On your home screen, since it is a task for you, you'll get the email saying log in and do this. You can just scroll down to your task list, and typically that quarterly report is one of the items contained in there, all right? Another key, fill out your quarterly report, save it, and then status change it. If you don't status change it, we can't review it. Quarterly reports are due by the 30th, FYI. I know there was, for a few of you in the past, they were due the 15th, but according to guidelines, management staff met, and quarterly reports are due the 30th of the reporting month. The amendment revision request form. So again, this is all covered in Argo, but we've covered 3 tent poles. The project elements form, that's where you're going to provide all the unique elements of your project. The amendment request form, right, which is, or rather the quarterly reports, which are going to generate automatically, and you'll submit those. And then if you need to request an amendment, right, some of you might. That's not necessarily even a requirement. It's just something that may come up. Generally speaking, the amendment revision request form, what you have to do is status change your project first into amendment request in process, right? Once it's there, you'll be able to open the form, edit it, and save it. Then you'll status change it to amendment request submitted. That's pretty much the whole process, right? Once you do status change your project into amendment request in process, it'll be on your task list. But prior to that, it won't be there. We'll cover that in a minute. One of the biggest things I can show you in the system is once you have an active project, how do you find it? We'll look at that real quickly in a moment. These are technical resources that are linked here in the slideshow. They'll be available for those of you online. The recording and the slideshow will be posted by the end of next week. So they're linked pretty easily there. But I'll also toggle off the presentation here and show you the browser real quick. So I'm going to go ahead and take just a moment here. And I just want to quickly sorry, it takes just a minute, y'all. We have to go to the display settings and I have to share it with. For those of you online, I have to make this accessible for the folks here in the presentation room. So give me just a sec, but I promise it'll be much easier in a moment. Okay, so now we're all looking at the same thing. Let's minimize our presentation real quickly. Okay, so before we get into anything, I just want to point everybody towards the resources that they'll need to look at. That's primarily what I want to show you today, okay? And then we'll look at how to search your projects, right? So on this resources tab, oh, sorry. Okay. Well, what's different is we're doing this for those of you online. We typically don't, there we go. So we typically only have to present to folks that are attending the webinar, but today we'll just work around it. All of us have been through COVID. We all know that it takes a lot more to be a disaster than it used to, right? So, so on this page, the resources for active and awarded projects here cover the tent poles, right? How to use the project elements form tells you everything you need to know about that form, okay? That's a PDF. How to sign your grant agreement covers everything we just looked at. It's a video, all right? It'll walk you through everything we just talked about. The complete guide to reimbursement requests, our fiscal team will get into that. You want to review this from a technical aspect, okay? It's not going to tell you what's eligible, what's not eligible. They'll cover that. But this guide will give you step-by-step screenshots on what you can expect through the entire reimbursement process. I highly recommend that you review this guide as much as possible. And then how to complete guide to quarterly reports. We'll guide you through that whole process. How to submit an amendment revision request. We'll guide you through that. And then when you get ready to sign your amendment, this link will cover that, okay? So if you can figure out the document portal, if you can figure out the quarterly reports, if you can figure out how to request an amendment if you need it, if you can figure out how to request a reimbursement, then you can manage a grant through Argo, right? So it seems complicated, but those are the four main things, right? The main other thing I want to cover today is how to find your project, right? This is a big thing for folks because up until this point in the system, everything's been in your task list, right? When you were doing your application, then you weren't looking necessarily, sorry, I have to remind myself the password for this account is. Okay. This is my fake sponsor account, okay? So Up until this point in the system, most people are used to logging in and everything is in your task list, right? This person has a whole bunch of tasks because I've added myself to a lot of projects. But let's pretend it's not there. It's active. How do I find it? Because the whole time I've been applying, I could just go down there to my tasks and there it was. Here's what you need to do. And I say this to folks a lot, but this is a very important piece of navigating the system. You're going to click the Applications tab. Okay, you're going to click Clear, and then you're going to click Search, and you're going to see all the projects you're a part of here. For those of you that are grant consultants, if you're added to the applications, you want one login with one username, and that will let you look at all your projects just doing what I just did. For those of you that are working for larger municipalities, if you've added certain people to certain projects and other people to other ones, and they're not all the same, folks that log in and click Applications, click Clear and click Search will just see the projects they're added to, okay? Very handy tool. From here, you simply click on the name of the project and that'll take you to that Forms menu, okay? That also works for payments. If you've ever done a payment in the system and you want to look at all of them because you can't find it, Payments tab, Clear, Search. Everything you've done will show up right there. Same for quarterly reports, okay? That's I don't want to turn this into an Argo workshop, but what I see most commonly is that folks struggle with how to find their project, right? So they know how to create a reimbursement request from the guide, but they go into the Applications tab and they don't know how to search for it, right? So that's going to be key. And I'm going to extend these back. Bring our PowerPoint back. And we'll go from current slide. Okay. Yes.
So what if we needed to add, because I know that we have, certain myself and, certain parties, but we needed to add somebody, so it doesn't look like we're able to add somebody to that project.
Great question.
Needs to have access. How do we do that?
Okay, so that's a great question. This is what I recommend. So in the system, if you've created an application, but new people have come onto the project since that started, some of you just go in and put them on the organization. That doesn't then add them to the project. Then you have to open the project, go to add edit people and do all this stuff. Don't do that. Have your users go to the new user page, okay, or the login page for the system and click new user, and then fill in their information and choose your organization from the drop-down list. Here's why that's important. Let's say you're 4 years into this project. I also need to add them to every quarterly report and reimbursement that's been created. They're separate documents technically, okay? I have a tool where I can take a user request and add them to the main application and all the sub-documents at one time. You won't want to do that. That's a lot of clicking for you and it's one click for me. So the best way I can tell you is have your users go to login page, click new user, fill in the required information, and then choose your organization from the drop-down list, okay? What I can tell you is if they're going to request to be a sponsor administrator and they don't, I'm looking for two things. I'm looking for a title, right? They need to have a title that is befitting of the sponsor administrator, director of Parks and Recreation would do, for example. And I need to see an email address that's part of the domain that's set for the other stuff. So at cityboston.com or at eaglepass.com, I'm looking for that. If you try to join with a Gmail account, I'm going to reach out to the sponsor admin and verify that that person can join the organization. But have them follow that sequence. I approve all the user accounts manually so that nobody can get into your system or your organization by just trying to sign up. There is no possible way that can happen in the system, no matter how good all the chatbots get. I'm the person that has to review the request, and the system admin does that. So have them go through that, and that would be the best recommendation.
So like in our finance, we have one person that she handles all those
Mm-hmm.
on the financial side, but she's like my backup and I'm her backup.
Sure.
So we could add her in.
Absolutely. And then what would happen is when you add the person to the project, if their name is checked on the application, that's important because that's the only way they're going to get the automated emails that generate about the project in the system. Okay. So very important to have the right roster of folks managing your projects. And that happens, usually financial folks are some of the last folks to come on board of these applications because it's not really of their concern until it's a project rather than an application, right? It's very common to bring people on during the grant agreement signature process. That happens a lot. Sometimes different eyes want to look at these agreements or be party to them in terms of verifying, any signatures or any documents that are being looked at. So definitely a very common use case. But if you try to add them yourself, the other common use case is people add them to the organization. They don't put them on the application, and then they say that person doesn't have access. They don't, because you have to go to the application and actually check them. So, you bet. Any other technical questions or anything like that? You check online and make sure we don't have anything. Nope. Looks like we don't. Okay. Well, if any of you do run into questions at any time, my name is all over the application. It's all over the system. A lot of you have emailed me. I try to respond very quickly. I don't want the technical part of managing a grant to be a burden. It should be the programmatic part that you're able to focus on. So if it feels like it's a burden, let me know and we'll try to point you to some resources that'll make it manageable for you. So thanks everybody for your time. Appreciate y'all.
Sure, appreciate it. Blake Powers, our system admin. Wow, he's good. Hi, y'all. Again, I'm Brian Lofgren. I'm fiscal manager here. We're going to move into the fiscal portion of the presentation, or as you've seen, what I like to call the setup for a smooth reimbursement. We've gone over with Blake quite a bit of the Argo system online. We looked a little bit about how to drive in there and how to set up the sponsor elements, how to add those new people who need to be part of the admin. And we've looked a little bit at doing some inputs into Argo, including like quarterly reporting. And we've seen those links at the very intro page to Argo resources that can guide each member of your team, or when you wear different hats, guide you in the different things you have to do. So now we're going to move into what we consider a little more of the fiscal side of it and the fiscal management of it. And we're going to get down to the nuts and bolts of how your organization receives the grant money. We're going to cover what documents are required pre and post award. We're going to talk about the forms that we need to set up in our accounting system, which is outside of Argo, which is the state accounting system. We're going to go over uploading your compliance information and other information that's being asked for. Going to talk a little bit about the appraisal process, and for those of you who are acquiring land, the things that you need to know on that. And we'll do some step-by-step on the reimbursement process in Argo. Since this part of the grant cycle involves our audit team, I want to say their names and let them give you a wave to remind you who you're speaking with later when you're emailing back and forth or on the phone. Our audit team, Michael Garza, you give a wave, and Daryl Edgar and Michael Sanford are our auditors. Mary Helen is our accountant, not with us today. Our audit team lead is Marcy Cavazos Colunga, and then I'm Brian, the fiscal manager. The function of our audit team is to preserve the integrity of the grant process by ensuring that all of our grants and all the expenditures and reimbursements are made according to the rules and the regulations of what you've maybe heard to CFR 200. Sure. There we go. Those are the lovely people you'll see. But again, we're going to make sure that those expenditures and reimbursements are made according to CFR 200, to Texas Grant Management Standards, and to Chapter 24 Parks and Wildlife Code, as those all apply. Be sure that we're absolutely in tune with the mission of the organization, which is to get our organizations, y'all, the grant funds for the projects that are making such a difference in your community. It would be easier for us to say yes and okay to everything, to any requests or any backup that it's submitted. But we must maintain a minimum floor of documentation and process across not only the local park grant program, but co-op, voting, target range, and all the things that we do. so that it'll stand up to scrutiny when our grant management process is put to audit. Because we will be audited by the state and by the feds, and it's a regular occurrence, regular part of the process. And so that's why we're going to be asking for a lot of that backup and documentation so that it's ready to go when it's time to proof up. Well, to get more back to the nuts and bolts of what you're really here for, we're going to look into the different parts of the grant reimbursement process. Here we go. I promise you a little bit about the pre-agreement and post-agreement documents necessary. Pre-agreement before you have the signature done, and post-agreement once you have all that. We're looking to set you up in the state's financial system. We mentioned before that we're setting you up as vendors, your city, your community, your county, your organization. And so we need the AP 152 form. There is a little example of that coming up, and direct deposit form. That makes sure that the reimbursement is going to go smoothly. Post-agreement elements that you need to upload into Argo, such as the public bid, advertisement, and bid tabulations, the executed construction contracts, the construction contract change orders, appraisals for your project if there's land acquisition, and we'll get a little more in depth into appraisals, and then reimbursement requests and some more specifics on that. The AP 152, I know that you specifically might not have to do it, but all of your organizations have to set up folks as vendors to get them paid out, and we do too. There's been a new AP 152 set form recently. If you're in for now, but if you, well, and you already have because you're getting all your information uploaded now. But this is a quick example of it. It is linked in our resources, and it's a required document. We need your entity's legal name, mostly for cities of, counties of, and that. Y'all don't have DBAs and stuff like that. Any post-award changes to remittance address must be submitted on this updated AP 152, or also called a TINS form. And note, if you have a direct deposit change and you have a change of address, you need to update the AP 152 and the direct deposit form to be updated. Those two have to be like lockstep and in sync, and they're raising the bar within TPWD to make sure all the I's are dotted, T's crossed, and P's and Q's are ordered. And make sure to sign and date. If you have questions, let us know. But again, the resource button, when you get to the Argo landing page, can walk you through all those examples. Direct deposit, just a little more about that. We would much prefer you to be on direct deposit. It runs so much smoother. But you only have to do that if you want to be on direct deposit. Like I said, it's required that the entity name and the address are identical on the AP 152 and direct deposit. This is just the red tape. If it's not, it's going to slow down the reimbursement, and it's going to be us talking with you or talking with your finance or accounting department. And if you have a change on either of those, make sure that that they are lockstep. And then I have a tip here in the yellow. Section 5 down towards the bottom is often overlooked by not checking a box that will result in the form being rejected. So if you do, when you do log into Argo and you pull up your specific project, your grant project, in the project elements button at the bottom of that list, it'll show you the different things that are required. You'll look and see that, oh, here's the AP 152 form or the direct deposit form. Those are the ones we're talking about right now, but also all the other things that you'll need will be in a list below there. And so you'll go and tell Argo to upload it from your computer there and hit upload, and it'll be on file for us. Okay, and that's moving us into the appraisal process. Marcy, I'd like to invite you up.
everyone. I'm going to briefly go over the appraisal process for those of you that require an appraisal. So if your project includes land acquisition, whether it's through purchase, donation, or if it's city-owned parkland, you will be required to submit an appraisal report. And Blake touched on the project elements area. If you need to submit one, this is where you'll see it. It'll be listed there. And it'll show up here. And so what you do is just like any other of those project elements, you'll upload the file here. And once we have a chance to review it, you will get a notification. And you'll either upload a yellow book or a standard appraisal report. And the difference between those will be a standard is less comprehensive. It's just the USPAP report. So the tip here is to hire an appraiser that is experienced with yellow book appraisal reports because there is a big difference. As far as the appraisal process, your appraiser will know how to what to include in the report, and these are the main, I guess, elements in a report that we'll be looking at. So again, the tip is to here's another tip, and that is to provide this list to your appraiser before he prepares it. And there is a checklist in the resource area. The fiscal team has a section. Blake showed you that area in Argo. It's a fiscal resource area. So again, provide this checklist to your appraiser. If you submit an appraisal report, you're either going to get 1 or 2 notifications through the system. If it's on hold, this is a sample of the notification that'll come across through the system. And so this is like a list of the common hold reasons that an appraisal report will go on hold. It's either too old and it needs to be within a year of when it was prepared, or not identifying what the highest and best use is, or if it's missing a boundary map in the report, or if a yellow book appraisal is required in a regular report is submitted. So those are the common ones. So if it does go on hold, then what will happen is that we'll reach out to your appraiser to remedy the report with whatever issue is outstanding. And then once we receive the revised report, then this is an example of the accepted report notification. You'll get a similar notification with similar wording. So we often get asked, how long does the appraisal approval process take? And the short answer is it depends. If everything is complete and perfect, we'd like to say 4 weeks. Most likely it'll be less than 4 weeks, but we like to under-promise and over-deliver. So, but if it does go on hold, it will largely depend on how quickly we receive those outstanding items being remedied. And now I'd like to pass, that's it for appraisal reports. I kept it brief. And now Mike will go over the reimbursement process.
Can I make a comment on the appraisal? The difference between a regular appraisal and a yellow book is not just it's an entirely different piece. Only certified persons, which is a small number of appraisals, and yellow book, are generally booked up, they're slow. you've got an appraisal degree, I certainly know that.
All right, oh, do you have any? Okay. All right, well, now I'll discuss the reimbursement process requirements. This is everyone's favorite topic. This is how you get paid. So the key items in the reimbursement package are the budget summary, the billing matrix or spreadsheet, billing invoices, the actual invoices and proof of payment, for the force account or timesheets, the fancy way of saying timesheets, and equipment documentation, and then finally the certification form. So just to kind of reiterate what's already been mentioned a couple of times, we have this really great guide that has all this information that I'm about to give y'all. So if you ever need to refer to it, this is really the best place to find it. And anything that we're discussing today can be found here. And as you can see, the Rec Grants, that's the login page when you get in. In the very top right-hand corner, you see the Resources tab, and then that will take you to here. And as you can see, number 8, Fiscal Resources, is where you can find the guide and any other sort of documents that we commonly use, such as the timesheets and then the AP 152 or any direct deposit authorization. So this is a very nifty link to remember. So first things first, the budget summary. So this might look familiar to y'all. The budget summary this form is integrated with your project. So this will auto-populate anytime you're in the Argo system. And this is all stuff that were approved from your, when you were going through the application process. And these are your approved budget categories, your project elements. And as you can see at the very top, we have professional services. At the very bottom, we have construction. And if you have any land acquisition or land match, that would be in the middle under letter B. The most common ones we often see are A and C. And if you have land match, that'll only be applicable to you. And then, we can cross that bridge when we get there. But more often than not, you'll be using A and C. All right, and then this is the billing matrix or the spreadsheet that's built into the Argo. This is where you spend most of your time when you're preparing your documentation. It's meant to be completed in its entirety to submit for each reimbursement you submit. So that means you'll need to make sure that everything that's input in the spreadsheet backs into your approved budget summary, and it has to tie back to it. So anything that's within the scope of your grant would tie back to your budget summary, and you put it here. As you can see, we have an example here, like for sod from Grass Inc. on May 17th. And the activity was performed on May 17th, but it was purchased on the 17th. And that's the only difference between the two. They're very commonly the same date, but you could technically buy materials or something and then perform the activity at another date. So you just gotta make sure you identify that. And then as you can see, it's invoice number 123, paid with check number 456, and the requested amounts are $5,000 on the far right. And also you would include the service period at the top right there underneath reimbursement details as to the date range as to when these invoices are being submitted. So as I said, you'll fill this out and you'll include any contractor pay apps, any invoices, and any sort of itemized or detailed cash receipts of whatever it is you're purchasing or whatever it is you're claiming for reimbursement, as long as it ties back to your budget summary. And the forms of proof of payment that we require that when you submit this information is a check scan, a front and back check scan from the bank showing that it was processed by the bank or processed and paid by the bank, assuming you wrote a check. If you paid for the credit card or you sent funds electronically, we also require a bank statement showing where the funds were pulled from to show that it's been paid. And that's usually in the form of a bank statement or credit card statement, depending on how you paid for it. And same thing applies for electronic fund transfer, any funds paid electronically. And we also require a petty cash log. You can pay things with cash, but we require that you provide a petty cash log to show us where the money came from. And also, I don't have a screenshot of this, but below this, you'll see where you upload your documentation. And this is important. So no matter how many invoices you submit, there's no limit. I think the system limits you to 50. But no matter how many you submit, it has to be merged into one PDF. And that's where you would upload it underneath this. And it just says documentation in bold letters. And you can only upload one thing. And it'd be the PDF with everything that I mentioned. No, at least I'm not aware of any limit. No.
So my recommendation is reduce the size of the PDF, on the safe side. There is a limit on the number of line items on the reimbursement form, 16 You'll see them not in that cover that, you have to go out and keep it. Most of the time, I don't think any of you is many line items, 60 line items, but you're request. If you are, it's because you lost that point. That's because the calculation on the form, and every time it opens, and after a certain way that these forms are set up, calculation can't finish in a certain amount of time, it'll just carry the page out. So during the testing, I found that in 60, you try to push to 70, you time out sometimes. So
Thank you, Blake. Okay, and the next thing. So I discussed timesheets. So if you have any force account labor, if you have some staff working on your project and it's been approved in your budget summary, you can submit that for reimbursement as well. We have a sample one that we can provide to sponsors, but I know most places have their own timesheets. As long as it has the same information as like the names of the employees, the date, and then the rate and hours. I mean, we can accept whatever you have, but ideally this would be preferable because we made this form, but it's not required. You can use your own if you have one. And also at the bottom, you can see equipment. If you have any if you have equipment usage in your budget summary, that's where you would put it. And we usually base those rates off the Army Corps of Engineers. So that's where you would get that. And then fringe of benefits on the right, you can see it on the right there too. And that's where you would put all that information. This one looks identical to the volunteer one, except the only difference is with the employee one, we require pay stubs. So you have to show us that you pay these employees for performing this work. As with volunteers, always need a timesheet and sign from the supervisor or whoever's in charge. Okay, and then I know I kind of touched on this earlier, so I kind of touch on this again because it's a lot of confusion whenever we receive pay apps from sponsors. So pay apps by nature they're very large, and not usually, I'd say most of the time, not everything that's in a pay app is applicable or within the scope of the grant that we issued y'all. So it's really important that if there are expenses that are not applicable to your pay app that you're submitting, that you identify those items for us. And you can make that in the form of a schedule, or you can just even mark it on the pay app. If you scan it and just start highlighting, like this one's part of the grant, this one isn't, that's fine too. And that's really the whole point of this slide, just to reiterate that pay apps can get really convoluted. So it's really important to identify any applicable expenses to the grant from the payout. And then this is the final step. So whenever you see this, you know you're in the clear. So after your reimbursement's been reviewed and approved by fiscal, you'll receive an email with prompting you to upload this certification form. And the certification form, it auto populates based on the approved reimbursement after it's been reviewed and approved by us. All this will auto populate. All you need to do is print it out and sign it, and then upload it back, and then status change it. That's always really important because it won't do it automatically. All right, and to kind of give a brief recap of what I just threw at y'all. You must fill out the billing matrix completely. Make sure every line item is filled as applicable. You'll provide invoices, pay apps, receipts, proof of payment for all costs related to the grant in the same order listed in your spreadsheet. And that's really important. That will really help us speed up the process of reviewing your documentation. If it matches, if it's in the same order, then we can get that out pretty quickly, assuming everything's together, everything's complete. And then, as I mentioned, proof of payment consists of checks, electronic fund transfers, procurement cards or credit card charges, and then detailed cash receipts. And then make sure any bank records are provided to prove that the charges in question have been paid with your guys' resources. And then as soon as you have all that, then you'll submit your certification form as soon as possible with the correct amount, which will be auto-populated. And then you receive a notification to complete it. And I think you'll receive one as well whenever we push it through to payment. And then finally, tips for success. These are just kind of things that we've kind of picked up from sponsors over previous years as to like stuff we would recommend. First of all, you want to submit your reimbursement request in a timely manner, ideally quarterly, but there's no hard rule on that. You want to organize it you want to organize your support documentation, as I mentioned, in the same order listed in your billing matrix, with proof of payment immediately following each proof of cost. And like I said, that's just to make it simpler to review and get it out quicker. And then remember, as Blake had mentioned, remember to save often because the system will time you out and it won't notify you always. So make sure you just do it often because the worst thing you could do is spend like an hour on it, uploading all your documentation, and then you save and then it times out and then you have to start all over. So make sure you save often. And then also, whenever you're done saving, make sure you status change because this process won't work unless you do it. So your documentation will stay where it's at until you status change it. So always remember that after you save, status change. And then as always, you can utilize the 2020 or the Argo 2020 resources that I mentioned, that I showed you on the very first slide and where to find it. And then also, if you need any additional help, you can always call us and we can always walk you through it over the phone as well.
Mike, I have a couple of questions coming online.
Oh, sure.
First one is from Victor. Victor's asking how do we enter in-kind amounts that go towards our map?
Okay, so that will actually be in the sponsor. I can go back and show you. Okay, so you see right there where it says sponsor match on the very right, on the very far right, that's where your in-kind will go. If you just have in-kind expenses that you're submitting and nothing that you're asking for reimbursement, you'll use that far right column. And as these are local park grants, you get paid at 50%. So if, for example, like this invoice is for 5,000 in my example right there, you would actually get 2,500 and then 2,500 would be applied to match. Any other questions?
Next question, this is coming in from Marcy, and this is a two-part. It's about pay stubs. Do the pay stubs have to show a specific CWD grant fund, or just that yes, we as the city pay the park staff? That's question one. The second part says, actually, we're including staff time as managed. So we can justify those amounts the same way.
No, you don't have to justify it differently. As long as you provide the timesheets and then provide the pay stubs, just to show that those employees have been paid. But in the documentation, it's really important to have the correct date range. And it doesn't have to specifically say it's for so-and-so project or whatever. As long as it's within the date range and it's within scope of the grant, then it can be used. All right, thank you. Anyone else over here?
One more thing.
Yes.
On the budget line item, let's say you get $10,000, but the actual line item for that cost was $12,000. How, because I know like on some of our federal grants, we, if it's under 10%, we can just, move stuff around.
Yeah.
If it's over 10%, we have to have permission. What is that? I don't know.
It's the same kind of deal with us. You can go over your estimated budget summary, approvals, but we'll just take it out from another element, and so they can cover it. But as long as it's within the scope of the grant and program gives us the okay, we don't have an issue with it. Sure.
One easy. So let's say I'm a city and I am turning in my proof of payment. My credit card statement, that's pages and pages and pages long. Maybe I don't want to give you all that. Is it cool to redact?
Yeah, absolutely. You don't have to show us everything. You can only show, if you have a bank statement that has a lot of things that are not related to the grant, you can redact all that. Just leave the part that's applicable to us, and that's all we really need to see.
And a follow-up. Well, since it is going to be pages, maybe just want to cover and then where the expense shows within the pages.
Yeah, like in the transaction history. Yeah, absolutely. You can just go. You can get straight to the point. You don't have to provide all the bank statements or all the pages. If you have certain items that are on one page, then you can just give us that one, and that should be fine. As long as it has the bank letterhead and we can tell that it's from the bank, it's a bank statement, then it shouldn't be an issue. Okay. Anything else?
Does it have to be a bank statement like you received in the mail, or could you, like, when you do a wire transfer, you can verify it on the screen and
Yeah. When I say bank statement, it can be an electronic one. Like it doesn't have to be like a hard copy. It can be one from like if it was from Chase, for example, with the chase.com, you could pull that and we can accept that. Okay. Anything else? All right, thank you. I really appreciate your time, and I think it's time for a break.
We'll come back at 2:20.
All right, I think we'll jump back into it here. You're not. Okay. So I think now we'll shift our focus into your programmatic requirements. I know a lot of you probably have some history administering our grants, so a lot of this is probably pretty similar to what you've done in the past, but we have some new sponsors here as well. So we'll run through all your project management tasks. You'll also see them called program elements, and that's how they're labeled in Argo. But again, please everyone, feel free to ask questions as we make our way through all these. And so before we get started on all the specific project management tasks, I'll give you a little bit of background on funding. As you all probably are well aware of by now, we have both state funding and federal funding running through our program. So today's meeting is kind of a mix between state funded grants and federal funded grants. So we'll run through some of the differences between those two funding streams. We'll talk a little bit about what the anticipated timelines are, and that will apply primarily to the new grants. Then we'll go through grant agreement phases, common project management tasks, closeout process, and then long-term compliance. And again, you'll hear from everyone on the team. So let's start off and talk a little bit about state-funded grants. Just by a quick show of hands, are there any state-funded grants in the room today? So we've got a few, okay? So both the federal grants and the state-funded grants, we presented our funding recommendations for both of those, the whole previous grant cycle in January of this year, so earlier this year. Most of you have probably already had your grant coordinator come out and visit with you and visit the park. We try and do those primarily between February and March. After that, we'll go ahead and you've heard probably learn more than you cared to learn about the AP 15210s form. But we've triggered that, so most of you have already filled those out and uploaded those back into Argo, in addition to your direct deposit forms. So again, these are pre-agreement tasks. And then for the state-funded folks, by next month, we should have your grant agreements issued to you. You've seen where those go in Argo, so you'll get an automated notification in Argo once we sign that and upload that. And then for the state-funded grants, you get 4 years for your period performance right out of the gate. So for most of you, that'll put your period performance expiration date at April 30th of 2027. In the past, we used to get, oh, sorry, go ahead, Megan.
I thought it used to be 3 years.
It did used to be 3 years. And so we would offer 3 years with the ability to go 4 if necessary. We've taken that out. Just everyone needs more time in this day and age. And so we're just offering 4 years now. So there's no longer any time extensions for state funded grants. You just get. Correct. Which is a good segue into the federal funding, because there are some differences here. Again, all of our federally funded grants were awarded in January of this year at the Parks and Wildlife Commission meeting. There's a little, probably the primary difference between federal funding and state funding is before we can issue a local agreement to any of our federally funded sponsors, we first have to enter into a project agreement with the National Park Service. and that can take a little bit of time to get that done. Essentially, if you have any kind of potential environmental permitting, if you have cultural resource or archaeological survey requirements as part of your projects, things that were identified during our application review. For a federally funded grant, those things all have to be taken care of before we can get a grant agreement in place from the National Park Service. So as all of you know, if you've ever had to do any kind of environmental permitting in the past, that can be a lengthy process. So once we've worked through all those elements, our best guess is that the application will go in, the submittal will go in to the National Park Service by July 31st of this year. NPS offers us 3 short windows throughout the year to submit applications. And so June 1 through July 31st is what they call round 3. And it's our hope that we'll get all those submitted within that round. For all of you with new grants that are federally funded, we have already prepared a draft of your application and submitted that to the National Park Service. So we will be following up with you all and coordinating if there's any additional information needed as part of that federal approval process. With applications, federally funded applications that are submitted in round 3, our best guess is that a grant agreement will be issued by September 30th of this year. We also offer this little caveat with that date. Delays are possible when coordinating at the federal level. We will do everything we can in our power to ensure your project gets started as quickly as possible. Sometimes that's not the case. And so we will keep you all in the loop if your project happens to fall into that category. Same deal with direct deposits and AP10s. Those are required for all projects. And then here's where it differs a little. This is how we used to do the state projects. So the National Park Service gives you 3 years. You do have the ability to extend to 4 if possible. We've even had some success extending certain projects to 5 years if possible. We have been requesting the ability to just get 4 years right off the bat for the National Park Service. So we're hopeful that'll happen at some point in time, but no guarantee there. Any questions from anyone regarding timeline or the differences between the state funding and the federal funding? Okay. So extensions are possible. We'll go into amendments in a little more detail. Again, you know, if you need a time extension, we've had a lot of success getting those through at the federal level. They don't happen overnight. We've had some have taken, you know, several months. And so, you know, as we continue to monitor your quarterly status reports, as we communicate during the life of your project, we'll try and identify the need for an extension well in advance, just so, you know, we can get that process without any kind of break in your period of performance. So I mentioned what the National Park Service calls compliance, and I'm going to stay on federally funded grants here for the next few slides. Any kind, oh, I'm sorry, do you have a question? Oh, okay. If you have any kind of potential permitting or surveys or anything like that that's required as part of your grant, again, all those things have to take place before the National Park Service will issue a grant agreement. As you all know, many of you even submitted your projects to the Texas Historical Commission during the application phase, so that kind of gets that process started. As part of THC's review of your application, they may identify the need for an archaeological survey or a cultural resources survey. If you're state funded, we can usually handle that post-agreement before any construction is permitted. But again, that has to take place early on for federally funded grants. Any kind of environmental permitting, again, this is something that has to occur pre-agreement. stream crossings, potential jurisdictional waters, wetlands in your park. These are all things that could trigger potential U.S. Army Corps of Engineer permitting or even informal consultation. Fish and Wildlife Service, we have had a number of grants that have needed some sort of bird survey, karst survey, and so those, similar to any kind of Corps of Engineers permitting. Not only does that survey need to be performed, but then it needs to be submitted to the regulating agency, and then we need to get some sort of concurrence from them that the survey is adequate and that you're good to proceed. So while you're waiting, what can you get done? I know, especially the new grants, you've just gotten word that you got a new grant. Word's trickling around the community that a new park is coming, and so folks are going to want to see stuff occurring sooner rather than later. So while you're waiting for your agreement, there are some things that you can get started on. One is your temporary sign, and we'll go into the requirements for the temporary signage. Essentially, it's a big park that you put out, or a big sign you put out in the park that indicates, hey, here, something's coming. Here's the funding stream. Here's where the money's coming from. Keep an eye out on this park. If you're doing the design, bid, build approach, and you've got a consultant that's working on construction plans and you've established a pre-agreement date with your application, you can go ahead and get started on your construction plans. If you're unsure whether or not you've got the pre-agreement date established, please reach out to your grant coordinator, especially before you do, you set that consultant loose and start paying invoices from them. If you did not establish a pre-agreement date with your application, it's not too late, and we can still do that before your agreement has been issued. So keep that in mind. Just communicate where you are in the agreement phase and where you are with your design phase with your grant consultant, grant coordinator, and we'll work with you on that. We've spoken about appraisals. If you've got acquisition as part of your project, you can go ahead and get the appraisal started pre-agreement. Interpretive signage design, if you have a question? No, okay. If you've got interpretive signage, you can go ahead and get started on that. If you've got landscaping as part of your project scope, you can go ahead and pull that plant list together and get that sent over to us. And a lot of these things are items that we can go ahead and review and approve just to kind of help things get started a little sooner once you get your agreement in place. So there are, on the flip side of that, there are a few things that you definitely don't want to get started on yet until your agreement's been issued. Don't start construction. That's a big one. Don't spend any money on construction-related equipment. Don't procure anything through a purchasing co-op if you're doing that. Any money spent on a construction-related expense prior to the period of performance is not going to be eligible for reimbursement. So if you're getting pressure from a vendor to go ahead and make a purchase now, let us know. If there's anything we can do to get the agreement issued sooner, we will. We can provide verification to you that the funding is coming, the agreement is forthcoming. So, sometimes folks have provided that to their vendor just to let them know, yes, we still will be procuring these elements. Don't purchase land if you've got acquisition as part of your project. If it's donated land, don't accept control of that land until the agreement's been issued. The caveat to that is if you have a waiver of retroactivity for your acquisition, in which case you can go ahead and take control of that land. If you don't have a waiver in place, but you do have acquisition and suddenly you're finding yourself with a narrow window to acquire that property, reach out to your grant coordinator. We can still get a waiver of retroactivity in place. And obviously don't request reimbursements, but if you're not spending any money, that's the case. If you do have a pre-agreement date established for professional services, those will be eligible for reimbursement, but not until the project has been moved over into active status, once the agreement's been issued.
We're waiting for an agreement and I'm not sure where they are with the design, but we need to get permission from you all first.
Okay.
Is that right?
It is, and so we'll need to go back and see if we established a pre-agreement date with National Park Service. I'm pretty sure we did. We usually do that anyway when we submit things to the National Park Service. But yeah, let us double check that. And if we haven't, it's probably not too late for us to do that. I think Lindsay's going to get up now and talk to you a little bit about the different phases of the grant agreement.
Howdy. Again, I'm Lindsay Sansom. Thanks for having me today. I'm one of the local parks grant coordinator for the Houston Southeast Texas region. So the grant agreement phases. So this is kind of the process that you have to go through to get your local grant agreement set up. So many of you have either gone through this process or you're at the very beginning of this process. So earlier today, you heard our fiscal team talk about the direct deposit and the TENS forms and Argo. Those are the very first things that we need from our sponsors in order to get things going and get the ball rolling on our end in order to set up the contract numbers, et cetera. So once we get those forms, we get them to fiscal and fiscal gets the contract number. And then from there, we start compiling the maps and the budget, and we get all of that set up in the agreement, and then we issue it for signature. So the agreement signatures can be a little tricky if you've never gone through it before. Essentially, in Argo, you can use this link here to download the entire PDF of the agreement, and that PDF will reference all of the attachments separately, but then there are a couple of attachments that you have to sign in addition to the main agreement. So the signatures required are the main agreement, the grant agreement, the boundary map, the certificate of land dedication, and the certificate regarding lobbying. And those can be downloaded separately by just clicking the links in Argo associated with it. That way, whenever you get your person, whoever your point of contact is that needs to sign the grants and the maps, etc., they can sign them all at once. You can scan them all back in as one PDF and send it back to us. So a little bit about the federal funding versus state funding. Dan already talked a little bit about the period of performance. It's either 3 years for federal funding or 4 years for state funding, and you can get up to 1 year extension for the federal funding, but the state funding, like he said, is cut off right at that 4-year period. So you'll sign the entire sign and return the entire document, and just whenever you are doing that, make sure that you have signed those additional forms. So this is an example of our boundary map. We will have a place for Dan to sign, or in this example, it's Dana, and for your local state contact to sign. This is what the certificate of land dedication looks like. This is just to ensure that you're agreeing to keep the property as public parkland in perpetuity. And additional documents are signed by reference. And what that means essentially is that in that primary grant agreement document, it lists all of these documents in that document. And so whenever you sign that grant agreement document, you're essentially agreeing to, it's sort of like when you sign at the doctor's office. Do you agree that you've received all these forms? It's like that. So you're agreeing that you've received all of these forms and you agree to these forms. Something that's very important that Dan has already said and Fiscal has already said, everybody's already said this, and I'm sure you've all heard it many times, but we keep repeating it because it's very important. You cannot begin construction on any grant elements until the grant agreement has been executed. That means you cannot purchase playground equipment, even if you don't start construction, like you can't do anything. And then the only exception is if you have that pre-agreement cost built in the application, and that's essentially just for professional services. So now I'm going to hand it over to Crystal. She's going to talk to you a little bit about the common project management elements that you will find in Argo.
Right, I'm Crystal Locke, excuse me, local parks grant coordinator for our central region. And some of the common project management elements that you'll see are listed. So again, we're taking you from, Lindsay, you've uploaded that agreement in Argo, you've status changed that. So we've received that notification that it's there. We're verifying those signatures and going through the additional steps needed on our end. And then we will get into that task elements list that Blake mentioned earlier in the presentation. And this is where you're going to find, we'll trigger tasks associated with your specific project. And those include the Texas Department of Licensing and Regulation, the architectural barriers, the TCEQ stormwater permitting, the plans and specifications, the construction procurement, the temporary and the permanent signage, the meets and bounds survey, and it triggers those quarterly status reports. Some of the less common, pending what the scope of your project are. So again, all of our projects at this point have been submitted to THC for review, and some have come back and require additional archaeological surveys. So those are additional tasks that you might see if it's specific to your project, along with any type of core coordination, U.S. Fish and Wildlife surveys, environmental assessments. Again, if your project scope includes native landscaping, we'll have that native plant list triggered in Argo where you'll upload that information. And again, these are more project specific, pending what's included in your scope. Just some of the timing that we're seeing right now, as Gandalf, I think, had alluded to earlier, and the Yellow Book appraisal process, sometimes taking up to a year. So on our end, as one of our requirements is we're submitting the information over to, so this is for federally funded projects with land acquisition, that Yellow Book appraisal. TPWD contracts with a state certified review appraiser to review those appraisal documents to make sure that they're in conformity with the Yellow Book. So there's lots of communication between our third party contractor along with the sponsor and us to make sure that that's taken care of. Other permitting that we're seeing, again, the environmental coordination, archaeological surveys, some of those can take months. And then weeks, those are things more specific to us as project coordinators. So all of the temporary and permanent signage, the construction plans and documentation, along with those native plant lists, we're typically able to review those and turn those around in a couple of weeks. There we go. So as Blake had mentioned, this is just a snapshot of what you're going to see in that project elements task and what that looks like. Again, this is just showing like some of the forms have been uploaded, they've been approved by us. You're going to see that big green check. Others that even either have not been touched at this point, or if there's a modification required, you'll see that red X. And if there's anything on your end that you've submitted and it requires us to take a look at, we're going to see this caution symbol. All right, so into some of these specific tasks. So all of our required projects, for all of our projects, it's required to register the projects with TDLR to ensure compliance. We ask that those construction plans are submitted to the registered accessibility specialist for review. And so what we're going to want to see in that task elements form is for you to upload a copy of that online registration form receipt from TDLR. Moving into the TCEQ stormwater permit, again, another requirement. This is based on the level of site disturbance. So if it's less than an acre, you're exempt. More than an acre, you're going to use the e-forms online in order to get this submitted. And again, what we're looking for in Argo is that stormwater general permit. Moving into our construction plans and specs, again, what we're wanting to see on our end is that 100% signed and sealed construction plans. And basically, our team is just looking, and we're reviewing those plans to ensure that all of those grant elements identified in that budget summary and in the scope of work, we're able to identify all of those elements in the plans and specs, whether there's accessibility components or sustainability components. We're able to see all of those in the construction documents. And also, if you're going to be using like a purchasing co-op or a buy board, cut sheets for like playground equipment and those types of things, it's appropriate to submit cut sheets. Any questions thus far? Moving into the construction methods and procurement, so the design, bid, build. Again, the documentation that we want to see uploaded is the public invitation for bids. So whether that's, you're advertising in a local newspaper. We also are wanting to see that bid tabulation form. If there was one sole bidder, just document that at some point as you're uploading that content into Argo. And then we're wanting to see that signed construction contract. If the low bid is not chosen, we just need a justification for why. For the purchasing cooperative, so for this, we're wanting to see that council resolution that you've got the authorization to use that purchasing cooperative and that participation agreement, along with the quote or the invoice specific to the elements that you're purchasing. Moving into native plant lists, again, as we had mentioned earlier, our program will reimburse native plants unless it's Bermuda grass and you're using that specifically for a sports field. Then Bermuda grass is the lone exception. Otherwise, we're just wanting to see that plant list uploaded before purchasing, and we'll make sure and verify that. And then we will we'll note that in Argo as complete, or we'll reach out or modify the element in Argo if we've got any questions or see something that needs to be addressed prior to making those purchases. And what is the great website to use to verify some of those?
Wildflower.org is the best way to work on website. Great.
Wildflower.org. Thank you.
So for that, we would just need to see the RFQ with the city to ensure that,
Moving into the quarterly status reports, as Blake had noted earlier, those are due on the 30th of January, April, July, and October. And what we're wanting to see, this again gives us a great update as to where you're at in the project. We asked to list the individual elements that are consistent with that budget, the budget summary, and then we ask that you just give us a percentage of each of those components addressed in that line item. And so it's just more helpful, instead of giving that overall we're 50% complete, it's helpful for us to start looking at whether or not an amendment might be needed if those individual items are addressed. We'll ask you to note any delays. This is where you'll be able to check yes or no if you're ready for that final inspection, and then we will get with you to schedule that and come out and see the park. And we love photos. I love park photos, and they're required in the quarterly status reports. Moving into some of the signage. So this is the temporary sign design, again, required for all of our projects. What's great about the resources built out in those task elements in Argo is all of those links are clickable, and there's great examples given for both our state and federally funded projects, the language that you'll use for the signage. The dimensions for the temporary sign is 4x8. And we ask that you upload a draft of that signage just for us to take a look at prior to or before printing and installing that. Moving into the permanent sign design, again, required for all of our projects. The minimum dimension is 18 inches by 24 inches. Again, in that document that will be linked once that task is triggered in Argo, you'll see examples for state and federal funding, the language that we'd like to see used. Again, we ask that you upload that prior to having that printed and installed. And this is going to be one of those elements that we're looking for at the park forever. From the time that we're out there for the final inspection through all of our post-completion inspections. Interpretive sign, this is another one that pending what your project scope is. So anything that provides natural or cultural information, unfortunately not historical information. And again, that action item is just we're wanting to see that before it's printed and installed. And lastly, the meets and bounds survey. And so this is so important for us because the park is being funded by our program. It is a park forever. And so this is important for us because 25 years down the road, when there may be other grant coordinators in the position and they're out regularly inspecting the parks, this gives us what we're looking for in terms of those boundaries being intact. And it can be CAD generated as well. All right, I'm going to turn things over to Megan, and she's going to go into more in depth about the amendment requests process. Do you have any questions up until this point with some of the specific project elements? Yeah, of course. Yes, it will be available. Yes.
Webinar and PowerPoint posted, and then there'll be a grant management webinar and PowerPoint.
If you didn't sign the sign-in sheet, be sure to do that so that we have your.
Maggie, did you have a question?
Yeah. So you guys were saying that some of this could be done before the everything. Is it set up that you can upload it onto the portal?
It should be, if it's an agreement that we can. So if you have a project you're waiting on, you don't see them in, it's out.
Okay. Yeah. We're supposed to get it in the summer, so I guess we can.
Yeah, so for the oil app, I think that's an agreement with that, so we should be able to do it.
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to talk a little bit about the amendment request process. So in regards to extensions to your project period, if you have an LWCF grant, you can request a 1-year time extension. In your document request to us, we need to know the cause of the delay, the grant elements that'll still need to be completed, how the project will finish in the requested time frame, assurance that the additional time will ensure successful completion of the project,
that the grant coordinator will then submit all that information that you give to us to the NPS, and that approval can take months to process. So please, please, please be sure to request your extension to us at least 3 months before your grant expires. The sooner you can get it to us, the sooner we can get it to them, and the sooner we can get it back to you. Amendment request scope changes. Actually, I think I skipped one. We highly discourage scope changes. The reason to that is that it can be very lengthy and time-consuming process in order for us to change scopes. It's not always guaranteed to be accepted by the NPS, and it can interfere with the grant timeline and completion. A simple and flexible project scope helps us avoid the need for scope change amendments in the first place. So what constitutes as a scope change amendment? Here's an example. Here they had exercise equipment in the original scope, and then they wanted to get rid of that and put in parking. That would be something that we would highly discourage, because then that would be considered a scope change there. One that we could do would be to adjust funding. So say you originally had $50,000 toward exercise equipment in the play area, was $60,000, but you wanted to switch those two numbers. That's something that we can accommodate in the budget. So how to request an amendment in Argo. We have a whole section that's going to explain how that's done. You go in Argo to the resources tab, and then you're going to click on number 6, which is labeled the Argo 2020 awarded active project resources. From there, you're going to scroll down again to number 6 and click on how to submit an amendment revision request. And then there'll be a step-by-step video tutorial on how to do that. And again, you can always reach out to your grant coordinator for more information. And then here's how the closeout process is going to work. So we hold 5% until the construction is complete and the final inspection has been done. Once the final construction is complete and the final inspection has been done, we will release that final 5%. And then once you're completely closed and paid out, your project is considered complete. When we do those final inspections, we are going to walk the site. We want to make sure all the project elements are included in the final and finished project. We want to make sure that you have staff members there to be present for any questions during that final site inspection. And we're going to want to ensure that all program signage has been installed. Public events. We love to attend groundbreakings and ribbon cutting. So please, please, please invite us and your state and federal elected officials to any of these ribbon cuttings or groundbreakings that you may have. And then compliance. So this is after your park has been completed. We do require every 5 years, we will come out and do a final, or what's called a post-completion inspection of your your project. And that we come out and just make sure that the elements are in place and that there's no issues as far as safety, that the outdoor recreation is still there, that it's still a park, just things along those lines to make sure you're providing everything you said that you would provide in our agreement. And then for maintenance, every 25 years, we want to make sure that all outdoor elements remain for 25 years and any pools or indoor facilities remain for at least 40 years. And we will inspect that on those 5-year inspections. And then finally, we want to make sure that the parkland is dedicated in perpetuity, that there's no non-recreational elements on the park now, that the park is safe and open to the public, the permanent sign is still in place, the boundaries are protected, and that would be the final or the post-completion inspections. And then now Lindsay is going to talk about the TORP survey.
All right. So you have heard about the TORP. All right, Tim.
So TORP stands for Texas Outdoor Recreation Plan, and it's essentially the stateside grant to the federal government that makes us eligible for land and water conservation funds, which, by the way, are the funds we use for our local grant project. So it's a really important plan for our state. And we are surveying all of, we've already done a survey amongst just park users, but we are also surveying park providers. So that's you guys. You are our target demographic for this survey. And essentially what it is it's a community needs assessment. So we take the results from this survey and we use it to update our scoring criteria. So you all have been successful in receiving a grant. So you know how to pander to the scoring criteria. Not that we are going to call it pandering, that was a bad word choice, but you all know that we have scoring criteria and that's how we determine a competitive grant. What you may not know is that the scoring criteria is developed every 5 years through a public input, public participation process. And so that is what the survey is all about. You are the public recreation providers that we are hoping to get your input on how needs are changing in your communities, what kinds of changes in demographics are you seeing in your communities. What we want to make sure that we are funding the types of parks that you need. And in order to do that, we are looking to solicit your input to get information on changing trends and changing dynamics and evolving needs in your community, which will help us to update the scoring criteria to better reflect the needs of your communities. So we are going to be sending out the link with the slides so you can do it on your computer. If you don't want to do it on your phone, it is a little bit difficult to do on your phone. It's a lengthy survey, so I apologize about that. But the needs of Texas outdoor recreation is complex, so we needed a slightly longer survey in order to really encapsulate the complexity of those needs. We also have a paper copy if that is better for you or more accessible. So that is my plug, shameless plug for please fill out my survey. Does anybody have questions about the Texas Outdoor Recreation Plan or the survey? Yes.
I know you want that, so is it advisable to go ahead and fill out the manager?
Please, yes. Anyone and everyone in recreation, in your departments can fill out this survey. It's all about understanding the needs of Texans, and we want as many diverse perspectives on that as possible because we're a big and diverse state, right? So in addition to the slides that we'll be sending out, there are also some strips back there. Are there still strips back there, Megan? There's some strips back there that have the QR code that you can take back with you to your offices and you can share them with your colleagues. If you are a member of TRAPS, the TRAPS Association, they also just sent out an email with the survey link. We're working in conjunction with Texas A&M University to collect this data, and all of your responses will be anonymous. There, at the very end of the survey, there's an opportunity for you to, we ask whether or not you'd be willing to participate in a focus group or a community advisory board. Essentially what we're going to do with the results from this survey is we are going to take them, analyze the results, try and make adjustments to the community, to the scoring criteria, and then we'll hold focus groups to get feedback on what are these, how do we best interpret the results from the survey, et cetera. So if you would like to be involved in the focus groups or in a community advisory board type role, please fill that out at the very end if interested. Yes, ma'am.
Is this something the grant can offer, or is it something that we need to have?
anyone and everyone that is in Parks and Recreation can fill this out. So it can be your personal opinion. It can also be the personal opinion of your Parks and Recreation director or the Public Works or the design engineers or the consultants. I know we have some of those that have strong opinions. So it can really be anyone who has an informed opinion about outdoor recreation needs in Texas. Anybody else? All right. Now I'll take questions about the grant management process. Okay, let me try to figure this out. I can do it. Okay. Pay stubs, that one was answered. Sorry, I'm looking for the questions that haven't been answered. It looks like they've all been answered. What if an element has to be deleted because costs are very different now than when it was submitted? Okay, so if there's a scope change, this is a question we do get a lot, so I'll go ahead and say it out loud for everyone. If you have a change to your scope, so we'll start at the broad overview. So if you have to request a time extension, you need to submit an amendment, and during that amendment phase, you're not eligible for any kind of reimbursement. So that's one type of scope change, or that's one type of amendment. The other type is if you have to change the actual grant elements in the scope, in the project scope. So let's say you did your budget and now it's 2 years later, you're actually getting the grant funded because it took a long time through MPA. You know, let's say it was an LWCF funded grant and it took longer than anticipated because of compliance issues. And now the reality of funding these projects looks very different, right? So you're looking for ways to reduce your scope. We always suggest, if possible, to not remove grant elements, because once you remove a grant element, then you have to initiate a scope change. And if it is a federally funded grant, it can be a very lengthy process. And during that time, you won't be able to do any kind of reimbursements because you'll be in an amendment phase. So we really recommend that you don't do scope changes if at all possible. Now, if there's just no way around it and you have to, then we obviously will work with you. We will try to make the process as smooth as possible and as efficient as possible with MPS and go from there. So other questions? Presentation will be available in its entirety. And the questions and answers, will we be sending those out as well? No, okay. Just the recording and the presentation. Any other questions for me? Or are there others I missed, Megan, that I'm not seeing?
It was one about 5 years. I think that's in 5 years.
Yes. As many times as you want.
They're making full progress.
Yes, we are always willing to work with our sponsors to continually improve their grant projects to try and achieve a competitive package. No, in fact, we love it when our we have multiple communities that have several grants with us. Yes.
Some people have had.
Any other questions for us?
We requested amendment to take a splash pad out. We have other playgrounds with elements. Is that a change in scope?
Yes.
So we'll submit that to National Park Service. I mean, it should take a while to get approval, but at the same time, we understand that sometimes that's the situation that people are in. I mean, everything costs 2 or 3 times. what
Well, and
it is.
it's not just the cost, it's the operation of it.
Yeah.
And it's-
Yeah,
And it's jumping in over our head in doing our first part.
And that's fine. I mean, we'll justify that. We'll get it approved. What
I'm
happened
just worried
over
about
it
that.
just takes time.
Yeah.
Yeah, it really did. Yeah. Yeah, that during the pandemic, I think we're like just now starting to see things improve. Slowly but surely. I'm gonna knock on wood, but yeah. Yeah. Right. Yeah, and sometimes communities are in situations where they, even if they can afford it, the lead time is so far out because of supply chain issues. So there's, and when there are issues like that, we're always, as your grant coordinator team, like we're always here to help you try to navigate that as smoothly as possible, and to try to address any concerns that you might have as they arise. Any other questions? I don't think so. Well, thank you guys so much for coming. We really are so pleased to be able to meet you in person or to see you again. We're happy to continue working with you on these projects, and we can't wait to see the results, right? Like, we love seeing the end project and being able to go out to the ribbon cuttings and see the communities using the parks. So that's the real reward for us at the end. So thank you again for coming, and please feel free to follow up with any questions as you move through your grant management process.